Hi everyone, Peter here with the Flipped Collaborate for Assignment 1 for EDU30064. So it's got a word limit of 1800 plus minus 10% plus a weighting of 40%. So you have two assignments for this unit and it's fairly heavy weighting, and we probably expect you to be on the heavier side of the word limit to meet all the criteria. So, your assignments will be around 2,000 words. Okay, if it's over a little bit, not too much. So let's start going through this. So, assignment 1 asks you to develop a teaching resource, very useful, which consists of 2 parts. Part 1 requires you to develop 2 activities for 1 year level and 1 content descriptor of your choosing from the Australian Science curriculum or your equivalent state or territory curriculum documents. Part 2, you analyse a range of assessment strategies that are appropriate for the 2 activities you've developed. So, as potential classroom teachers, you need to build an understanding and skills related to developing relevant and engaging lessons. This is our bread and butter as teachers. So within these science lessons, you need to incorporate ICT, I'll call it ICT, Information Communications Technology. You also need to incorporate problem-based learning approach to teaching in at least one of the activities. You also need to display your developing skills to competently assess, provide feedback, and report on student learning. So they're the 3 main things we need to see in this. So an utterly essential element of teaching is your ability to select and implement effective assessment strategies. So these inform us as teachers of how to make judgments to direct the student learning, and also to monitor progress of the student learning, and then assess how they've achieved, or if they've achieved, the learning objectives. This unit, of all the units U2, supports unit learning outcomes, and the 2 this one does is develop plans of lessons or units of work that reflect relevant current curriculum documentation and contemporary pedagogical approaches, including the use of problem-based learning, PBL, I'll call it throughout this, and ICT. And also arrange assessment strategies, as I just spoke, as a means of record keeping and purpose, benefits and limitations of this. So they're not all perfect for every activity, and we need to consider why they're good, or why they're different, why we choose different things for different activities in terms of assessment. Part 1 is approximately 1,300 to 1,400 words. So you select 1 content descriptor from any of the foundation to year 6 year levels of the national, state and or territory curriculum science documents. So they're science lessons. So 1 content descriptor for both lessons. Within this content descriptor, you need to outline the key concepts, main ideas of the content area you've chosen. So the key concepts need to align with the learning objectives that you develop for the activities that you create. And you'll need to look at the Australian curriculum to choose your content descriptors and figure out relative concepts from there. Or your state or territory curriculum, that's fine for this assignment, and it's important that you know your local documents well. So based on the learning objectives you develop and the key concepts related to the content descriptor you've chosen from the curriculum document, you develop 2 clear activities, and you include a few teaching strategies within those to deliver it to teach the concept and engage the children. So you are not developing a unit of work or a series of activities, but rather 2 activities that could be included by a teacher in a unit of work. So they might fit in a unit of work, and they're developing that one science concept. ICT has to be included in both activities, and at least one of the 2 activities must use a collaborative problem-based learning approach. So there's quite a bit of detail in our week 3 readings about problem-based learning or project-based learning, as it's known in using both of those terms. So really make sure you look at the week 3 module closely, and one of your activities must use that. Both can, but one has to pass. So for each of the 2 activities, you also need to include a list of resources, and we always do that, when developing activities, lesson plans, we think about the resources needed to deliver those and the best resources to help scaffold the children's learning of the concept. And there's quite a lot of really good resources in our modules too for you to draw upon. So you need to consider how each of your 2 activities fit within a particular kind of pedagogy that you've chosen, like a teaching philosophy or a teaching approach to deliver the activity. For instance, one of them will be PBL, the other one you might draw on your Discovering Science experiences with the 5 E's approach, which is just wonderful. That could be your other lesson or any other approach that you think is relevant and effective and really best practice. And generally they'll be hands-on and they'll be engaging for the students rather than just, filling out a worksheet that, is acceptable, but it's not ideal. Part 1. So you are provided with subheadings. You don't get a template or pro forma for this. You just need to set it out yourself. I'm going to unpack a student assignment from last teaching period for you to get an idea of how you might go about this. So you have to use these headings. You need a year level and content area, which will be about 10 words. You need to list, I would just dot point, key concepts. That'll be about 20 words. The learning objectives, which need to be clear and achievable by the end of the 2 lessons. You'll be able to, that's kind of what drives your assessment. You want the children from point A to the learning objectives that you've chosen. You want to find out if they've met them. So that'll be about 70 words for the learning objectives. These are just approximate word breakdowns. Activity 1, you'll have about 600 words. I would include my little dot point resources for each activity separately within that, which will be about 10 to 20 words, and activity 2 the same, about 600 words, including your resources. You'll need to just briefly outline an assessment strategy for each of these activities. That'd be included in your 600 words. Now this, you don't need to elaborate on that, but you need to show that you've got an assessment strategy. I suggest 2, so you've got enough to discuss in your part B, where you need to compare them. Now some students, most I found, include an overview, and this is about 200 words, and that might lower the word count of the body of your activities a little, but it's quite good to include an overview just to put everything in context. So here's an example of a prior student submission. So you can see they've used the headings, they've got the year level and content area, and this student chose Year 2 Physical Science. They've got the key concepts clearly dot pointed and referenced. So they've got 4. In reality, you will probably not need more than 4 because that would be too many concepts for 2 activities. So these, I'll just read through this. I won't read through the whole thing. But a push or pull affects how an object moves or changes shape. That's a nice, clear thing for the children to be learning. Forces cannot be seen. It's only possible to feel or observe its effects. A push or pull force can be used for a particular purpose. Strength of a push or pull will have a different effect on the movement of or position of the object. So they're very clear. They're all related to forces, push or pull. And this first one, the first dot point, that's actually the content descriptor from the Australian curriculum for Year 2. So that is the key concept. Then they've got their learning objectives, very clear. And these, now this is a student submission. So, it's not perfect. It might be a nice idea to have a think about, what you would do to improve it or what you thought was good about it. So the learning objectives for this physical science lesson with a focus on push or pull forces are to identify and describe how different pushes and pulls are involved in changing the movement of an object. And that's drawn from the Australian curriculum too, which is, very close to the first dot point key concept. Identify how pushes and pulls are in the environment and used in everyday life. Use ICT to investigate, create, communicate and share ideas. Develop science inquiry skills by sorting information, comparing observations, asking questions and drawing informed conclusions. And the last one, which links very well with PBL, students work collaboratively and effectively in teams. These are all actually accessible. This teacher delivering the lesson could assess all of those things. So they're all things that they can go, can the student do this at the end of the lesson? They have a resource list here. I can't quite remember if it's for both lessons or the one, and you can have one resource list for both lessons. That's absolutely fine. Depends how you want to set it out. So they've considered everything they need to include to deliver the lesson. So they've got iPads, the Canva program, interactive whiteboard, laptop, printed Quest checklist. I'm not 100% sure what that is. So, it's relative to the lesson. Clipboards, pencils, a Generation Genius video. Personally, I would have actually had a little citation there. Printed exit tickets, which is an assessment strategy they're including. So here's activity 1. This student chose to write an overview. It's fairly brief, and they've called their activity the Push-Pull Quest Activity 1. So the overview, and they've explained how the activity links to, in this case, the pedagogical choice is the explain stage of the 5E instructional model. And it's aimed to provide students with the opportunity to represent their understanding of force concepts. So they've linked it to the purpose of the science element within real-world contexts. That sort of links to PBL too, because PBL is based about real-world contexts. And you can also connect the 5Es with PBL. They don't exclude each other. They're talking about how the students are working in this overview. So you can see here, in teams of 2, students photograph examples of push and pull forces in the school grounds. Students, and you can see there's a typo here, I haven't corrected this. This is as is, the student submitted it. So whilst it's not perfect, it's still a very good example. Those students are encouraged to draw on their prior knowledge, communicate, compare and share ideas to help them make sense of their developing understanding. And they've got a citation there. Teams then collate images into a digital Venn diagram. The second dot point's explaining how ICT is incorporated in the activity through photographs of pushes and pulls and a medium to visually communicate their understanding. I won't read every bit there, but you can see this students included citations. And remember, the curriculum documents, yes, you have to cite them and use them throughout this, but they're not really academic references. We want you to look at readings from our unit, other science units you've done, other units that are relevant, and any extra readings if you're aiming for a high distinction too. So here's the example continued. Now, this is where it gets a little bit grey. An activity is really the body of a lesson. It's what the kids are doing. But for the purposes of this assessment that you're doing, it's not a bad idea to have an introduction and a conclusion as well as the body, just to provide context, and it also provides you an opportunity to pop a few teaching strategies in there that you might use. Don't make those parts too detailed, but they will help tick off the boxes in the criterion too, and also place the assessment in context related to the actual activity. So they've got an introduction. The class reviews the previous lesson, including the push and pull of both forces. So there's an assumed understanding that these children have actually done some activities related to push or pull prior to this. So they review their word wall. That's a teaching strategy that's quite effective. They watch a Generation Genius push-pull video, so that's a little bit of ICT in there, but we do expect a little bit more in ways of connecting students to developing their ICT skills. So watching a video is an intro, and have a brief discussion about push, pull, both push and pull. And it's all related to the actual activity, which is the body. This student's done a nice job, very clear, dot points, not too much detail, no extra words. You can see there's lots of concise language. It's like a recipe. We need it to be super duper clear, and you don't need to go into a great amount of detail, but it does need to be sequential and make sense. So the body of this, students work collaboratively in pairs to create a push-pull Venn diagram using photographs of pushes and pulls they find in the school grounds. They've included a little bit of a safety consideration, which is always very important when going outside. I would have included something in my resource list, such as hats and consideration of Sun Smart policy, because they're working outdoors. So, and they've also considered the boundaries, like making sure the children are safe when moving through the school, which is good. But they haven't gone into detail. It's brief, and that's all we need. Next step is divide students into mixed level groups. So they've considered how they're grouping them on mixed abilities, and allocate each member with either a manager or speaker role. You'll find when you look at the PBL Week 3 readings in our modules that assigning students roles in a group is a big part of that. So they have purpose, and it provides them with a structure to effectively collaborate. So this student's clearly, even though they haven't said PBL, I know as this student's ELA that they've done that. So that is one aspect of PBL that they've clearly considered. This helps students to work collaboratively as they are equally engaged and accountable and communicate more effectively. So they've justified that briefly. The manager in each team collects an iPad, the Quest checklist, C appendix, I'll talk about appendices later, pencil and a clipboard. The teams will have time to explore and locate several examples in the school grounds. Students take turns in taking photographs and marking off the checklist. So this is all linking to ICT, the push-pull purpose, so they're observing push-pull as they're going through. I'll just briefly go down here. I'm just scrolling down, so they're labelling diagrams. One thing I would have included here, and the last dot point says, during the activity, the teacher will rotate around the groups to observe, ask questions and guide learning. I think this student could have improved the body of this lesson, which is important, with a couple of example questions here to scaffold the learning and to promote deeper understanding of the actual concept of push or pull. So that would have given them a little bit of a higher mark. The conclusion, the managers return the equipment, students pack up. As a class, discuss some of the different forces that the students identified and photographed. Now here they do have the questions, so this is where they've kind of lifted it up. Why did they choose that push or pull? Was it easier or harder to find pushes, pulls, or both? Students complete an exit ticket. This is a great strategy, and it's also a good assessment strategy before leaving the class. The exit ticket: describe what a push is, what a pull is, and one thing you have learnt today. And they've included an appendix for this. And they've included consideration of differentiation too. They've also got the assessment here. Even though I know an exit ticket is a form of assessment, they've got a dot point here, formative assessment. The exit tickets and diagrams are used to measure students' current level of understanding of the concepts and to guide future lessons. It's brief, it's good, it's clear. Here's their second activity, so they do have a separate resource list, because otherwise it might be very long, because they might have very different activities. This activity is still developing the same concept, push, pull, and forces. And this is a Rube Goldberg machine. So you see the list of resources. Oh, sorry, I just scanned up. So they've got an overview for this. It's brief. The activity is linked to problem-based learning, so they have identified that very clearly in this lesson, even though the other lesson touched on that a little bit. Approach where students in small groups are presented with a problem to solve. Students design and build a Rube Goldberg machine to complete the simple task of pouring cereal. So students use their knowledge and understanding of how pushes and pulls and the strengths of these affect how an object moves or changes shape to successfully design and build their machine. It's very clear what this person wants the students to do and what science concept they want to explore. There's no definitive solution, therefore the students will need to work collaboratively to analyse the problem, identify issues, research, devise solutions, and then determine the best one. That is 100% spot on in terms of problem-based learning approach. ICT is used to engage, research, and present. Additionally, the students can video their tests to help refine their machines. And they've just made a note of why that's beneficial. I'm sorry, my neighbours have just turned on loud music, which they haven't done for quite some time. That's why I've chosen now. Just ignore it. So they've got the introduction. I'm not going to read all of this. The body, which is the activity. So you need to make sure this is really good. As a class, they discuss the design criteria. So they've given them a design criteria and marking rubrics. So they've provided these students with a rubric to guide their problem solving. So this enables students to have a clear understanding of the learning objectives, which they can use to guide them on the task. So really, that's going to be very beneficial in part 2, where they discuss and analyse the benefits and limitations of the assessment choices. They've divided the students into teams, they've given them roles, manager, recorder, speaker again, and it just details the steps of this student's chosen activity for push-pull. So there's two quite different activities that link well to the science concept and their learning objectives. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I do want to just note, this is from your 4.3 module, and when including ICT, it's very clear after year 1 and 2, but we do it all the time in foundation. I'm a foundation teacher. So we can see by looking across a range of content descriptors from F to 6 that the Australian curriculum science puts considerable emphasis on the use of digital technologies as a key skill. They explicitly mention starting from year 1. So considering your planning how you can incorporate cross-curricular links between the technology and science curricula where appropriate. And you'll see it's not just watching a video, it's a little bit more, it's deeper than that, it's more meaningful than that, and it gives the children more control, actually. They're not passive users, they're not just sitting there watching a video, they're not just playing a game on an iPad. That's, it's acceptable, it's engaging, but it's not particularly challenging, and it's not providing them with enough power over the ICT. We want them to, use it. So you can see for year 1 and 2, they use informal measurements in the collection. So collections, keyword, and recording of observations, so recording, with the assistance of digital technologies. They safely use appropriate materials, record observations again, using digital technologies. There's a number of things you can do, but just make sure it's more than just watching a video. But it's not the key component of your lesson, the science is. But that's used to engage the students as well. Now, part 2. About 500 to 600 words is part 2. I would have a separate heading for that, and this is where you analyse a range of assessment strategies for the activities you created. We want you to compare in your analysis and consider the benefits, limitations, and implementation constraints of each. I'll look at this same students part 2 to go through that a little bit. You need to consider and discuss how assessment strategies inform student progress and how this is essential to the ongoing teaching and learning process. We want you to use academic literature to consider and compare the assessment strategies in your lessons. Why did you choose them? Why were they relevant for that particular lesson? What were the benefits? Were there any limitations? If so, what and why? We also want you to consider, why do teachers need to assess and what is the purpose? So have a really good look at week 5, and week 6 also covers assessment. There's some great assessment ideas in there, really unpacks it, makes it very, very clear. And it is important. I know assessment's a big part of teaching. Sometimes I think it's too big a part. Like we can over-assess. So you need to think about why you're assessing, how is it benefiting the children, and how is it directing your learning, your teaching as well. So assessment's essential, but it's more than just a test. We really make sure you do have a good look at the week 5 readings. So here's this student's part 2 example. I'm not going to read all of this, but this is where you compare, make some comparisons, and automatically by discussing your assessment strategies in your lesson, I keep saying lessons, it says activities in there, and it is a bit of a grey area. It's just, an activity is the body of a lesson, basically. So this student has got, 5 paragraphs. It's not too long. And they've started off by discussing formative assessment strategies. In this activity included exit tickets. So formative is for learning, directing the learning. It's for the teacher as well as the students. There's many different types of assessment strategies that are formative. So exit tickets, the Venn diagrams, which the teacher will look at, and questioning. So questioning is an assessment strategy when used for that purpose. These are also used to obtain feedback on the student's level of knowledge, understanding, and skills to inform future science pedagogy. They've got a great reference here, Scamp and Preston, which is utilised throughout this unit. Now they go on to talk about the benefits of exit tickets. So they're great for students to reflect on the information they've learned, process new content, and express how they feel about the lesson. Furthermore, differentiation is possible by enabling students to respond using drawings or words. So that all of these things were clearly evident in this student's activity, or both of the activities. So you've got to draw on what you've put in your activities and analyse why you've done them. So don't talk about a whole lot of different assessment strategies you haven't used. And they've also talked about benefits in way it's supported students with learning difficulties or those with English as a second language. So they're all benefits of the types of assessment this student chose to use. An implementation constraint can be the timing of the exit tickets. Teachers should allow enough time for students to think through their responses and ensure the information is reliable and useful. So there's a constraint of applying this assessment strategy, and there are always not only benefits, but there are constraints and sometimes even drawbacks. Now they're making some comparisons here. Though both the exit ticket and questioning strategies can result in modifications to improve student outcomes, the advantage of questioning is that it can be quick, spontaneous, and can occur during instructions, which can also help clarify and evaluate the extent of students' understanding or misunderstanding in real time. So you can see they've thought about benefits, constraints. They've got a real variety in here, and they've made comparisons throughout. I won't read this whole thing, but they've talked about rubrics that they've used, etc. They've got a really, really good range of academic references to support the discussion throughout. Now, just in terms of including appendices or images, you don't have to do this, but if you're referring in the body of your lesson and in your discussion in part 2 to a rubric, I think it's really important that you're actually kind of creating a folio, and so considering what the rubric might look like is a very important thing. So feel free to include any appendices that support your submission, and this student did include quite a few. So I've written here, if you're making reference to a rubric or checklist, it's best to include it as an appendix. It's good practice to think about what you're assessing, why, and creating one specific to your activity. Alternatively, you could just find one online that's reasonably close to provide us, the ELAs, with an example of what you have in mind that's close to what you're assessing, and include that. If you do that, you must acknowledge the source. And in some cases, a description can be fine without an appendix, depending on what it is. So some students pop in images into their assignment, that's also fine. So this student included quite a few, but here's the Rube Goldberg machine design criteria that would be used to guide the students. They just got that from an outside source. It was definitely acknowledged and cited, whilst I haven't got that here. Here's a strategy of an exit slip that they, a sample, sorry, of an exit slip they included. So, look, that's a bit of an outline. I hope I haven't kept you for too long. It's a bit of a long flip to collaborate, but I hope that, you know, for anybody wanting to start early or prior to our live collaborate, get into this assignment and start to have a think about it, you'll have lots of questions. The first time I did this unit, I had to go at this activity and hadn't seen any examples, and I was on the wrong track for a while. It was actually very hard. It's a very tight word count, so keep it really simple, keep your language concise, and really stick to that one content descriptor and, you know, a handful of learning objectives there. Don't make it too broad and keep it specific and clear. So I hope this is helpful, and we'll see you at the live collaborate. And don't forget to ask any questions if needed of your ELA. That's our job. We're here to help. Right. See you guys.